On part 4 of Sculpting the Goblin Baddie, I'm going to show you how to make the rough details. The Goblin Menace is up on Kickstarter right now. This set of fun and quirky goblins has been designed to bother, irritate, and annoy adventurers and armies alike. You'll be able to cause all kinds of trouble with these brats. Click the link below and add these guys to your collection. Alright, it's time to get sculpting. Hi there, this is Tom Mason, and welcome back to another episode of the Mini Sculpting Super Show. On the last episode, we got the figure to a main bulked out look. So we had all the right proportions and started to smooth everything out. Once you do that, it's time to move on to the rough details. So we're going to start to add in any other elements that aren't specifically part of, the figure's anatomy, such as you can see me adding here in the form of his little, tunic skirt thing. To be honest, I just completely blanked on what I had sculpted for his clothing at that moment, but I went back and checked. Yes, it is a little loincloth tunic skirt thing. So anyways, back to the rough details. So you're going to end up adding on some extra clay here to bulk up some various other areas, but with a mind for adding in those rough details. So as you'll see here, I'm putting in these large forms again, very similar to how I did when I was working on the anatomy, to just fill in space, make sure there's not going to be any weird undercuts, because this figure will be cast and molded and cast in pewter. But I also need to be aware of smoothing out, just continuing to smooth and refine the areas, because even though we can still leave the figure a little rough, and we won't do the entire finished polish until the very end, you want to make sure as you're putting in areas with detail, as you can see here on the eyes, that the area is pretty smooth. Before I go any further, I should say that I am using Fimo Professional to sculpt this still, and the figure is still unbaked. So the whole, every piece of clay you see on there is totally workable and movable, and you can add more pieces to it. It's one of the greatest advantages of working with polymer clay. While I do go back and forth between tools, the main one that I use at this stage is the Color Shaper. It's just really great for doing those fine little adjustments with the smoothing. You can press in to make some harsher straight lines, but also it gives a slight gentler touch as you're doing the rough details. You're not going to get quite as much of a hard jab into the clay, so it's a little more forgiving. But there are times that you need to switch out to a scalpel or to the Wax 5. And one of my favorite elements to focus on when doing at this rough stage is to start to just get a little bit of an expression on the face. Put just a semblance of the eye sockets. If the mouth is going to be open or anything like that, that's a great point to where you can just start to sell the expression. It just helps ground the figure in a direction and keep you on track. And at least for me, it gets me excited because it doesn't just look like a generic ball of clay anymore at that. Between bulking out and adding the rough details, I spend the majority of my time sculpting during these two stages. You're just always searching out for those small little areas of refinement you can make so that you get the figure just right. If you can nail these two parts, then the whole rest of the figure just kind of falls into place. It's just a matter of executing the finer details, which we'll get into later. It may seem like finer details are the more challenging part, but really that just comes down to time practicing them. This stage, there's just so much openness. There's so much potential in the figure still, even if you're following concept art. It's just very important to explore so you really nail the essence of the miniature. You can almost call this stage the finer bulking stage, since there's still quite a lot of little bulking going on. And even as you add details and start to create them, like this hand here, I'm adding on a little bit more element, but I'm not going to get into there. I'm just starting to get the smaller shapes, but it's still really a general overall bulking going on in the figure. And here's where I'm going to add another anchor point. Now, I'm not going to get super detailed on the hand, but I did want to start to cut in the fingers just enough so that I could start to get excited about it. That's really what anchor points are about. For me, it's so easy to get lost in the overall form and be scared to move the figure forward. When that starts to happen, that's when I do an anchor point, and you just pick a spot where you can add a little bit of detail and just sculpt it out, even if it's rough. You don't even have to take it as far as I end up on this initial hand here. That's one of the greatest things about working in polyclay. If you mess it up, you can just rip it off or move it around, adjust it. Like, nothing's set in stone. So you can afford to take the risk. It's not like you have to plan out your whole miniature like you do when you work in putty, where you've got a set window of time for it to cure, and you need to build up certain areas before you can build up other areas. And so it's a win-win. So just don't be afraid. And if you ever feel yourself getting stuck, just pick a detail and make yourself sculpt it real quick, even if it's not going to turn out great. Having something there will give you the drive to press on and continue forward with the miniature. The other thing I do at this stage is I start to look for areas that I can fill in. Little weird patches where an appendage might be near the body, or there's maybe a strange hole or undercut created. I start to fill that in and join pieces. Because whenever I'm making a miniature that will be molded and cast, I have to consider the production process and how the miniature will function as a mass-produced object. And one of the things for that is to consider undercuts, thin areas, or tiny little holes kind of passing through the miniature. All of those can affect how well the mold will perform. So anywhere I can, I start to look for spots to kind of fill those areas in. It might seem strange or like you're compromising the look or style of the figure, but to be honest, these are so small, especially when people are gaming with them, you don't notice those details, those aberrations in the figure. They end up fading away. You notice it as a sculptor, and maybe even as a painter if you're really far in and close and everything, but for the most part, those sort of things you'll never notice when you're on have it on the tabletop and gaming with them. There's really no right or wrong area to work on this figure. Well, the term is work the entire figure, the entire piece. You do a little here on the face, a little here on the belly, a little here on the arm, and then when you kind of get everything to a same-ish level of quality, that's when you start to once again go back in and start adding some more details, like I am here, where even though this is still kind of the rough detail area, I'm starting to get a little bit of this arm wrap going, just again to start to solidify the work and give myself some more direction, something to build off of. Because once you start adding in some of these details, it just starts to build on itself. You get one detail here, and then you feel comfortable that area will start to look good and finished, and then you can move on to another and another, and it just keeps building up. Well, as you can see, even I kind of break my own rules or break out of the stages, and I just couldn't help myself. I started making this strap and it started looking so cool, and I just wanted to kind of refine it and define it. But you know what? That's okay. And again, that's one of the great things about working with polymer clay is you have the freedom to spend some extra time doing a little detail in an area, and if it doesn't work out, you can go back and change it or repair it. You're not stuck with it like you are when you're sculpting a figure in putty. And in the end, what really matters is that this is fun and that you are working towards completing the miniature, because there's nothing worse than doing a little here, doing a little there, getting frustrated, and just never picking your tools back up. Because in the end, you just have to keep sculpting. So until part 5, you know what to do.